Tonight, the Chancellor tries to send a message to the world. We're backing a third runway at Heathrow, and we're going to make Britain the world's best connected place to do business. Also on Rachel Reeves' agenda, expansion at Luton and Gatwick airports and a new plan to create Europe's Silicon Valley between Oxford and Cambridge. The big question, when's it all going to happen? London Mayor Sadiq Khan says he's against Heathrow expanding and threatens to challenge the plans. While Ryanair boss Michael O'Leary tells me that Rachel Reeves has been talking rubbish all day and the plan is a dead cat. I'll see what the Treasury Minister Emma Reynolds has to say about that. I'll also be joined by the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Kevin Hollinrake. Plus, as Lord Mandelson makes another appearance on US TV to introduce himself as the new UK ambassador there, we've been delving into the archives to help those stateside who are perhaps less familiar with him. Familiar to us tonight, John McDonnell and Salma Shah, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, after weeks of speculation and a debate that's gone on for more than 2 decades, the government says it backs a third runway at Heathrow Airport. So it does feel like quite a moment. Now, that's not the end of it. Of course, there will be legal challenges, including potentially even from the London Mayor Sadiq Khan. There's also, of course, been criticism from environmental campaigners and from MPs who are worried about the impact on their constituents. And there's also been criticism of the fact that Heathrow Airport expansion and many of the other plans announced today won't bear fruit in terms of growth for many years. With Heathrow, it could even take a decade. But it seems to me like that particular criticism, just the one about the time frame, is a bit unfair. Part of the problem with government is short-term thinking. When elections are every 5 years, there's an obvious bias towards policies that will make a difference quickly. The immediate impact is the one that matters, not the long-term impact, which might be a good way of running a political campaign, but it's not a great way of running a country. Well, let's hear from the Chancellor, shall we? She's been talking to Sky's economics and data editor, Ed Conway.
When the economy's in a hole, what is it you need? Growth, and lots of it. Or so said the Chancellor today. A lot.
Today, I want to talk about economic growth. The fastest growth, our growth prospects to British growth for growth, driving economic growth.
Now, in fairness, she only used the word 53 times, but even so, it's clear that the gloominess of last year is out of the window. The problem is, now we're talking about growth, there hasn't been that much of it recently.
Can you tell us how much growth has there been since you came into office?
The economy has stagnated now for more than a decade, and it takes more than 6 months to turn that around.
But to be clear, it is basically zero growth since July. So, I mean, do you feel you have any responsibility for part of that?
Well, the performance of our economy for over a decade now has been incredibly
No, but specifically
lacklustre.
since July, I wanted to talk about.
Well, but this is just continuing a theme of the last 14 years, and it's the theme that I'm determined to turn around. Do we need to go further and faster? Absolutely we do, which is why I've made significant announcements today and will continue to do so.
Among them, a third runway at Heathrow, 9 new reservoirs, not to mention the revival of the Oxford-Cambridge corridor linking the 2 university regions.
So why is the Chancellor so obsessed with growth? Well, it is the magic ingredient, lifting living standards, pushing down deficits. But though she might not like to admit it, there are trade-offs here. So environmental trade-offs, more flights at Heathrow means more growth but more emissions, and also other trade-offs too, which are probably best illustrated by this magnet.
You see, the superconducting magnets that go into MRI scanners were invented here in Oxford. But, and this is the critical bit, the British company behind it couldn't make a success of it. Only when Siemens, a German company, got involved did things turn around.
I just wonder whether there's something deeper here about British companies struggling to scale up.
No, and you're absolutely right that is a challenge, which is why we are introducing the capital market reforms, particularly around pension reform, unlocking £80 billion of long-term patient capital by creating these mega funds, the mergers of defined contribution and local government pension schemes, to create those larger funds that can invest at scale in the exciting opportunities in the UK.
Now, that might not get the headlines like Heathrow, but here's why it matters. At the other end of the promised Oxford-Cambridge corridor, you'll find this company, CMR Surgical. They make robots for keyhole surgery, and they're a potential world leader. But they're facing precisely the same challenge the MRI company in Oxford was before they got bought by the Germans: how to scale up here.
Historically, the UK is very good at getting companies to a certain level of maturity, and then historically they go somewhere else. That is a trend that at CMR we would very much like to buck. This industry, this business, could easily be 10, 20, 30 times larger.
Look around the country and actually you see loads of exciting companies, loads of potential growth. But turning brilliant ideas into brilliant businesses isn't just about growth. It's about resisting the temptation to sell out. It's about building for the long term. And that is not something this country has historically excelled at. Ed Conway, Sky News in Oxford.
Let's bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, shall we? Sam, I thought it was interesting listening to Ed Conway there, asking Rachel Reeves if she took any responsibility for the effectively flatlining growth since July. Her answer was like, look, we've had poor growth for ages, my job's to change it. Do you get the sense that what she's announced today will do that?
Well, as you said at the top of the programme, Sophie, the plans that Rachel Reeves is putting in place today will generate growth, probably, if they happen, but in 10 to 15 years' time. And she is leaning into long-term thinking that will probably only generate returns after her political career as Chancellor is long gone. Now, you made a cogent argument as to why that might be a good and sensible thing, but it's not going to deal with the problem that we're in right now. Look, this is a speech that has had as long a run-up to any speech that I can remember. And it wasn't really about a big argument. In fact, listening to Rachel Reeves this morning, I thought it was pretty much, in terms of the kind of case she was making, something that most of her predecessors, including her Conservatives ones, could have done in terms of the big picture argument. What was different and new about today is essentially she gave us a spreadsheet, a very, very long list of projects that she now promises she is effectively going to personally oversee in order to make sure that they happen, whether it's the Oxford to Cambridge Arc or some of the runway projects in a variety of different airports. And I think that in itself is interesting. But the question is, does simply her saying and signalling that she has an interest in a project make it happen? Because when I think of some of the big picture arguments that she's made, the big picture changes that they're making, I see the argument and I see the endpoint that they claim they're going to get to, but it's a lot harder than she makes out. Let me give you one example. She says developers shouldn't need to worry about the bats, and although there's no trade-off between green and building, we are going to change things to make things happen. But we haven't seen the wording of what they're proposing, and my understanding is it will fall short of delivering what she's promising there. Or take the pension changes. Politicians seeming to treat pension funds like free money for companies, always quite scary because pension funds can be quite vulnerable, as we've seen too many times in the past.
Yeah, we have. We've certainly seen that happen before, haven't we? Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, top of the Chancellor's wish list to boost economic growth is that third runway at Heathrow, and she could have a fight on her hands. The London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, said he would work cross-party to block it, using whatever means we can to challenge Heathrow Airport. The airport itself, of course, welcomed today's announcement, as has EasyJet. But the industry isn't all on the same page. As you'll now hear, I've been speaking to the boss of Ryanair, Michael O'Leary. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to get your view today. I'll be totally honest with you. This morning, I assumed that you'd be welcoming Rachel Reeves' idea of another runway at Heathrow with open arms, but you've got a bit more of a complicated reaction than that. Just explain your thoughts.
I mean, look, Rachel Reeves is talking rubbish all day long. The third runway at Heathrow is a dead cat. She has failed to deliver any growth. We have told her and sent her a plan in early December how to deliver growth in UK aviation, and not just in London but across all the regional airports of the UK, and that's abolish APD. The cost will be about $4 billion a year. It will be paid for once, twice over by a dramatic surge in inbound air travel and tourism across the UK. She's failed, and therefore what she's trying to do now is distract people with talk of a third runway. We support a third runway, but everybody should understand the third runway will not be delivered in Heathrow, if ever, until about 2040 or 2050. So it's at least 15 or 25 years away. This is not how you deliver growth in the UK economy in the next 5 years or during the lifetime of this government. So she's talking rubbish. She knows she's talking rubbish, but it's a great way of distracting everybody. She's going to fight with Sadiq Khan over the third runway at Heathrow. There's a much easier solution. Abolish APD, put money back in the pockets of ordinary families here in the UK going on holidays. Millions of Europeans who want to come and visit the UK but are put off by her ever-rising air travel taxes. Scrap those taxes, and if they do, Ryanair has written to her promising we will grow our traffic by 50% from 60 million passengers to 90 million passengers over the next 5 years.
So do you think that the third runway is going to make any difference to your investment in the UK at all then?
Not for the next 15 or 25 years. I mean, you know, we are supportive of the third runway, but the third runway in Heathrow will take until 2040 or 2050. We would like, and the point is, there's already runway capacity available in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, in Bristol, in Cardiff, in Exeter, Bournemouth. We have all that runways. What's holding back the growth is Rachel Reeves increasing APD, travel taxes on airfares. And, you know, the tax is scandalous. It's going from 13 to 15 pounds on a 45-pound ticket. It's a tax rate of 33%. She should abolish it and then stand back and watch the airlines deliver record growth, not in 2030 or 2040 or 2050, but this year, next year and the year after. We have the plan. You can have that growth, abolish APD taxes.
So what do you think is going on then? Do you think that she is worried about environmental concerns? Do you think that she just doesn't really get business? No. What's happening?
Well, it's clear she doesn't get business. I mean, this is a lady who spent 5 years in opposition promising a growth plan with the new government. Now, when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown went into office, the first thing they did was they granted independence to the Bank of England. The first thing Rachel Reeves did was increase national tax, employer taxes, which damages jobs growth, and increased air travel taxes, which damages air traffic and tourism growth. So she has no growth plans. She has no clue how to deliver growth. But talking about a third runway or having a big press conference about something that might or might not get delivered in 2040 gives the impression that she's doing something about growth when she knows that runway will not be delivered for 15 or 25 years. The question I want to put to Rachel Reeves is, one, when is the runway actually going to open in Heathrow? And she hasn't a clue. And two, why have you not done the simple measure that you could do to stimulate immediate growth in the UK, and that's abolish APD? Think of a family of four going on their holidays this year from the UK to somewhere in Spain. They could save 60 quid on their holidays. Think of an Italian family coming to the UK. They could save 60 quid. That's how you deliver growth. And that growth would result in filling hospitals, hotels, restaurants, tourist facilities all over the UK. You can have that growth. All we need is a chancellor who knows how to deliver that growth, and the only way to deliver that growth is abolish APD.
I think it's fair to say you're not someone who minces your words. You describe the Chancellor as Rachel Rubbish. You said Sadiq Khan has a very small brain. Yeah. In this interview, you said that she's been talking rubbish all day long. I mean, I don't need to get these people on side. Your tactics are a bit wrong here.
Well, I don't want to get Rachel Reeves on side. I want to expose the fact that she's talking rubbish and that she knows she's talking rubbish. There is a growth plan there. It involves scrapping APD. Yes, there will be a cost of $4 billion to the Exchequer, but the Exchequer spends about 1,200 billion a year. So it's fundable. But the enormous growth that would be delivered, not just by Ryanair, but all of the airlines, all of the tourist companies across all of the regions of the UK would be immediate and sustainable. And yet she doesn't get it. And, you know, she knows that a third runway in Heathrow, if it's ever built, is 15, 25 years away. I don't worry about Sadiq Khan. He is of no consequence to us. Ryanair is growing very strongly all across Europe. The Swedish government, the home of Greta Thunberg this year, abolished its aviation tax. The Hungarian government abolished aviation tax. The Italian government is abolishing aviation taxes because they get it. The way to deliver growth in air traffic, tourism and economy generally is abolish these stupid taxes that deter people from visiting your country.
I mean, look, some people will be alarmed listening to what you say. They are worried about aviation and the impact it has on the environment. You've obviously reportedly spoken to colleagues this week saying a Trump presidency should be a wake-up call to European governments. But some people say, look, no, it's right that governments worry about the environmental cost of flying.
Actually, one, there's a tiny environmental cost of flying. I mean, flying accounts for 2% of Europe's CO2 emissions. Driving, motor transport, accounts for 27%. Now, we know already we're investing hugely in electrification of road transport, so that 27% is going to dramatically fall in the next decade. Ryanair is going to spend $35 billion buying new aircraft in the next 8 years, which have 20% more seats, burn 20% less fuel, reduce CO2 emissions by 40% per seat, and are 50% quieter. New technology is the way forward here. You can have growth and a smaller footprint on the environment, but aviation is a tiny proportion of the overall impact on emissions. You can have both, but not with Rachel Reeves' crazy idea to chuck a dead cat third runway at Heathrow on the table today. We need much more effective action, and the way for her to deliver that growth, if she's really serious, and frankly I don't think she is, abolish APD, and then you'll have growth not just in Heathrow, but all over London, all over the regions of the UK, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, at every airport across the UK, and you would generate huge support from the tourism industry, the visitor attractions, restaurants, pubs, hotels. Get on with it, but stop trying to pretend you're going to deliver growth when all you have to do is talk about a third runway in Heathrow, which won't be delivered this side of 2040.
OK, there's one more question that I do want to squeeze in, because I think it's my first time interviewing you, so I do want to ask it. The 2-cap limit on drinks.
It's been memorable for me, Sophie.
Is that going to happen?
Yeah. I hope so. I mean, look, what we're trying to do is to cut back the amount of drinking that goes on at airports, particularly when flights are delayed. All airlines are seeing an increase in disruptive passenger behaviour, mainly because of excess alcohol consumption on delayed flights. People have come back and said, well, will Ryanair restrict people to 2 drinks on board the aircraft? Happily. We do it anyway. And particularly in the case of disruptive passenger, we don't serve them alcohol at all. We all in this industry need to do more to make sure that people who are boarding aircraft are sober, preferably not on drugs as well, but are certainly as sober. And all we've asked is, we're not saying don't serve them alcohol at airports, we're just saying limit it to 2 drinks. We limit duty-free sales by boarding pass. There's no reason we can't limit alcohol sales by boarding pass, and it's not unreasonable. By all means, have 2 drinks, but if you need a third one, have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee, and just behave. You make it a miserable experience for the other passengers on your flight. You make it a miserable experience for our cabin crew who are doing a good job to look after you. Just behave. It's not too much to ask. And if people like Tim Witherspoon, who opposes this, or Tim Martin in Witherspoon's, he wants to sell them more alcohol, stuff them full of alcohol. He doesn't have to deal with the consequences of it. The airlines do, and we've had enough. And frankly, we're now suing passengers to recover the cost of disrupted flights. It's the only way we can kind of take forward this issue. And I think all of the airlines want to see some kind of reasonable restraint on the sale of alcohol at airports. I find it astonishing. Airports are still the only places where there's no licensing laws. You can be buying pints at 6 o'clock in the morning. Who needs to be drinking pints at 6 o'clock in the morning? We're trying to be a bit more sensible. Just behave. We don't allow you to drink and drive. All we're saying is drink a little less before you fly, and then let's everybody have a better flight experience.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Good to talk.
Thank you, Sophie.
Oh, he doesn't hold back, does he? Let's bring in a duo for this evening, shall we? The former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, currently sitting as an independent MP after being suspended by the Labour Party, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Salma Shah. Great to have you both on the programme today. John, now, I'm sure there's not much you're going to agree with Michael O'Leary on, right? But on Heathrow, you do.
I'm glad he's overcome his shyness.
I know, yeah.
He's right on one thing, which is the length of time that it will take to have a third runway if there's an agreement. It's not 25 years, you're talking about 10, 15 years in operation beyond that. So he's right on that. I completely oppose him on the issue of passenger duty. He's just trying to maximise his profits, that's all. On the overall speech today, he showed, I welcome most of it, the infrastructure projects. A lot of them have been around for a long while, to be honest, so let's get on with them. I don't mind the long-term nature of some of them, because it will, at least you're making a start now. But I just thought the whole thing was tainted by Heathrow, because it won't produce the economic benefits that people are advocating. We've seen that from the objective assessments that have been made. It will knock us out of the really in tackling climate change, no doubt about that. There's no way we're going to meet our climate change targets. From the amount of carbon emissions, it completely eradicates the savings that Ed Miliband is making with regard to removing fossil fuel from our energy system. So that's the first thing. Of course, from a constituency point of view, I'm going to have 4,000 properties demolished. 8 to 10,000 of my constituents will lose their homes. But for the rest of London, there are going to be maybe 500,000 people who've never had noise above them before, and they're now going to have it. And then you're talking about 2 million people being affected overall. So it just tainted the whole thing. And actually, politically, I was looking at it and I thought, this is a car crash for us, because Heathrow will become the iconic battleground of the environmental issue. So our green credentials as a government, which I think are pretty good, are going to be shredded now. So I think it was a real mistake. But the rest of it, I just thought, why spoil it with that?
What's your take on Heathrow?
Well, I've actually always been pro a third runway for the reasons that actually the Chancellor set out, which is growth. But I don't think it's the only way that you can build capacity in the UK. And Michael O'Leary did make a very credible case about potential capacity in other airports.
In the regional airports.
So, yeah, so I don't, it has to be done by consent, and it has to be done by consent with the Mayor of London, it seems, but also with residents. So you can't impose that on people. But it's entirely the reason that the Conservative Party and the coalition weren't able to achieve it over the last government. And it was a stated policy. Rishi Sunak, the last Prime Minister, backed Heathrow expansion. So the overall theme of this speech, I felt, was a little desperate, because there wasn't anything really massively new in it. And also, it doesn't address the central issue, which is there is no money flowing into the UK for any of these big investments. Everything that was announced was small pieces of government money, which is not going to change the dynamic on growth.
We'll have a wider chat on growth later on the programme, but just on Heathrow in particular. John, look, you've got a long-standing issue with Heathrow. Yeah. As you say, your constituency very impacted by Heathrow. Do you think it might get through Parliament, or what do you think the mood is among MPs?
I think what will happen is what happened last time, is that as people wake up to the consequences of it, particularly as the corridors are published where the airplanes will fly, and you're talking about 2,000 more airplanes a day over people's heads. Many of the new flight paths will go over a large number of marginal constituencies that we've just won from the Labour Party has just won. So I think as MPs wake up to it, they'll realise they've got a battle on their hands. Non-London MPs are already saying, well, hang on, most of this investment, apart from the Manchester United ground development, most of this is in London, the South East again. What are we getting out of this? And then in addition to that, I think the environmental issue is becoming increasingly prevalent now. We've seen the report about the fires in California, so constituents will be asking the MPs when they go back, who are not London MPs, but from around the country, why are you doing this? You're putting our environment at risk. So in Parliament at the moment, I think there'll be a majority for the third runway, but as we move on, the campaigns get going, I think that will begin to turn. And remember, it isn't just the mayor legally challenging, it's the London boroughs themselves on a cross-party basis. You'll have all the environmental campaigners. And remember, in my constituency, in 2007, if it was, climate camp took place. Over 1,000 people turned up overnight to camp against it, and there were demonstrations. David Cameron then came out and said, no third runway. He said, we've changed our position on all this. So I think it will change, and that's why I just feel it was tainted. The reason I think this has happened, and this is my political analysis of it, is that when Labour took over, it was exposing the inheritance, doom and gloom. Usually politically then, what you do is say, this is how bad it is, but this is what we're going to do about it. And you bring forward those projects then. They did just doom and gloom. Now they're almost post-Christmas, oh, we need to do something. So they're grabbing at things. As I say, most of the projects are fine, but the third runway one, grabbing at that is, I think, a real electoral disaster for them.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. We'll have more from you throughout the programme. Well, the Chancellor's speech is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Daily Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph's Deputy Comment Editor, Annabelle Denham. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, you might think labelling the US president a little short of a white nationalist and a racist and a danger to the world might rule you out of contention to be the US's ambassador to the US, but not if you're Peter Mandelson. He's on course to be our man in Washington after disowning his earlier comments. We'll hear what he's had to say. Next up, though, we'll speak to the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Emma Reynolds. Don't go anywhere.
The only way into Gaza for us right now is with the Israeli military. The IDF had brought us in to show us a tunnel network under a residential neighbourhood.
The length of time it must have to have created these tunnels must have taken years.
At the end of the day, it's war at the top. It's war down here.
I'm Alistair Bungle, Sky's Middle East correspondent based here in Jerusalem.
As we were filming, there was a gun battle in the next street.
This neighbourhood, the Israeli military say, was the stronghold of Hamas's Rafah brigade.
It was just after 6:30 a.m. when the first shots were fired.
I remember everything. It was a day that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget.
There's no moon, perfect conditions for smugglers and human traffickers trying to move fuel, weapons and people.
The valleys in between, they're some of the main smuggling routes.
After days of negotiation, a major smuggler here has agreed to meet us.
The families that we've spoken to of people who have died trying to cross into Europe, they say you're a murderer. Are you a murderer?
No.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Begum was 15 when she left East London with 2 school friends to join Islamic State in Syria.
Do you feel that you have committed a crime to the extent that you should serve time in a British prison?
I mean, I feel like the only crime I committed was coming here.
If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. I can take the heat. The second thing that Harry Truman said, was in politics, if you want a friend, get a dog.
My children will love a dog.
In Tel Aviv, a constant streak of interceptions filled the night sky as waves of missiles came in.
It appears to be a very, very large and sustained attack on Israel.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Well, as we've been hearing, the Chancellor is taking no prisoners in her mission to go for growth. She vowed to go further and faster, described it as the #1 mission of this government. So without growth, does the Starmer Reeves project fail? I've been speaking to the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Emma Reynolds. Good to have you on the programme. Thanks for being here. So we heard a little earlier from the Chief Executive of Ryanair, Michael O'Leary. He told me today the Chancellor has been talking rubbish all day. She doesn't get business. He said when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown went into office, the first thing they did was granted independence to the Bank of England. The first thing Rachel Reeves did was increase employers' national insurance that damages jobs growth and increase air travel tax that damages tourism. What would you say to that?
Well, obviously, I disagree with him. And in fact, the first thing that the Chancellor of the Exchequer did when she got into power was to set out some very ambitious plans for planning reform, some very ambitious plans to unlock pension money, make sure that we leverage that patient capital into start-up and scale-up businesses. That was in July last year, and the announcements that she's made today about Heathrow expansion and about the Oxford-Cambridge growth corridor have been welcomed by 80 business groups across the country, and including national business organisations such as the CBI and the British Chambers of Commerce.
When do you think that growth might start feeding through into the economy from Heathrow? I'm not saying that is a reason not to do it, but let's be real. This is going to take a long time, isn't it?
Well, we're doing a suite of different reforms to ensure that we get our economy back on track and our
just
economy
on Heathrow, like what,
growing.
10 years, 20 years? Well, when will that start improving?
Well, we have said that we want proposals by the summer. That's an accelerated timetable. If you think what the last government did, they had a vote in 2018 and then they sat on it for years.
But we're not going to get growth by the summer because of the Heathrow.
Well, the Chancellor said earlier this morning that this will create 100,000 jobs. So it will create jobs in terms of the construction of the third runway, and it will also provide certainty to business that they can plan that we're going to enhance our main gateway in terms of exports. You think Scottish salmon, Scottish whisky, and many other exporters who rely on Heathrow to export to the rest of the world. So that in itself will have a knock-on effect, and that is why we've had such a warm welcome from so many business organisations.
I just want to ask you, about what some see as a bit of a contradiction in your attitude to growth. Because on the one hand, you have a chancellor saying growth is a #1 priority, and that means difficult decisions. That's why the economy trumps environmental concerns at Heathrow. But then the budget, with the changes to the amount of national insurance that employers are paying, has damaged growth. You accept that?
We accept that we had to take some very tough decisions.
Do you accept that they damaged growth?
Well, we accept that the decisions we made around national insurance will have some consequences, but it was important.
Do you accept it will change growth? And the reason I'm asking about growth specifically is because Rachel Reeves is saying that is the #1 priority. So do you accept that the changes to national insurance will damage growth?
Well, we don't know that because we trust the OBR to come out with their growth projections in late March. But what I will say is the economic fundamentals are strong. Inflation is down. Wages are increasing at their fastest rate for 3 years. We had a survey only last week from PwC of global chief executives across the world that said that the UK is the second most attractive place to invest. So the economic fundamentals are good. We've got to kickstart growth, and that's why we saw this big speech this morning from the Chancellor.
You must, on the national insurance rate, you must know whether or not that has an impact on growth.
Well, we know that overall...
It does have an impact on growth, doesn't it?
Well, look, we know it's a difficult thing for business, but we had to restore economic stability and put the public finances back on a firmer footing and invest...
was growth.
And invest in our public services, because without a healthy and well-educated workforce, that will lead to the productivity problems that we've had for so many years. So we've got to take some of these long-term decisions. They're not easy, and we said that that was the toughest decision we had to take to increase national insurance contributions. But look at all the other things we're doing to lift the barriers to growth. The Chancellor laid out some of them this morning, but we've done other stuff before that on pensions reform, on planning reform, on ensuring that we've got better skills provision in our country. So we're absolutely committed to working in partnership with business to bring down barriers to investment and to growth. But we had to put in place economic stability first. We saw what happened with Liz Truss and the mini-budget when economic stability wasn't secured. So we had to do that first to make sure that these other reforms have an effect.
Can I talk to you about how this is impacting the whole of the UK? Because there's lots today about boosting big cities, Manchester, London, the area between Oxford and Cambridge, but not much talk about Scotland, not much talk about Wales.
I've just mentioned Scottish salmon and Scottish
but I mean, I know.
whiskey.
I'll be honest. If you're from Scotland, you're saying, "Oh, right, we're really lucky that you're going to expanding. What you're telling us is going to be good for us is that you're expanding an airport in London."
It's an international gateway that has connectivity with other parts of the country.
You can see why, if you're from Scotland, you might think, hang on a minute, expanding an airport in London. What are you doing for Scotland?
Well, there are plenty of Scottish MPs on our side of the House who welcome this because they see it that we are in this global race for investment and for growth.
What project? Is there a project in Scotland that you can point to that's going to help growth?
Well, the Scottish Government got the largest budget settlement for quite some time in the budget. The Scottish Government have responsibility for ensuring that they are making wise decisions about their budget spending and their priorities. But certainly, GB Energy, being in Aberdeen, will lead to a creation of jobs and that move towards decarbonising electricity. So, yes, we have made announcements, perhaps not this morning, but over the time we've been in government, which are very relevant to the Scottish economy.
What impact has leaving the EU had on growth?
Well, it's been difficult, hasn't it? Because we didn't have an oven-baked deal, as we were told by not the former Prime Minister, because we've had several Prime Ministers since then. The Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, said it was an oven-baked deal. I think it was pretty raw in the middle. And it's been a botched Brexit deal, which has put up barriers, particularly for small business, but large business as well, particularly in goods. So I don't think it's had an overall benefit to growth. But we are where we are. We respect the referendum result, but we need to reset our relationship with the European Union, and we need to have a closer relationship with the European Union. We've been very clear about that, and that's what we're working towards. We've got the review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which we're already working on, and we hope that we can have a much better relationship with our European partners. Rachel Reeves is the first Chancellor since 2016 to go to a Eurogroup finance ministers meeting in Brussels. So we're working very actively on bringing down those barriers to trade with our nearest partner, the European Union.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, let's bring in John and Salma, shall we? Salma, what's your reaction to the interview?
I mean, it's just sort of very depressing because it's so limp. It's like the nation broke up with the Conservative government and they've moved on, OK? And they don't want this new person constantly talking about their ex all the time. They want to know what wonderful things lie ahead in this new relationship with this new government. This sort of going back constantly to, oh, we needed economic stability and we needed political stability. Well, we have that, and yet growth is flatlining, as you've talked about. There aren't the ideas there that really deal with some of the structural issues in the economy. I mean, Emma Reynolds did talk about skills, but we don't really have a consistent agenda or strategy around skills. We don't have a consistent strategy around how private capital is going to be brought into the UK. And I'm afraid, and I'm sure you're going to disagree with me heartily, but I'm afraid we are going to require something radical, and that is going to have to be around taxation. Labour absolutely boxed themselves in with this single strategic mistake, which was to cut out any prospect of any tax rises whatsoever in the election campaign. So what do you do now when you've boxed yourself in and you're now going and hitting the very entities, businesses that create wealth in this country?
What would you say to that?
I think we've discussed this before. I think in the general election campaign, it's true we didn't have an honest debate about the state of the economy and taxation from any of the political parties. I think it was a mistake to say we were not going to increase corporation tax or increase income tax on the wealthiest. And as a result of that, they then decided the national insurance increase, which when I shadowed Chancellor, I would never touch. Because it does have an impact on jobs.
That's interesting. So is that the analysis that you had,
yes.
you as Shadow Chancellor said that's a job?
That's right, I wouldn't touch it. But I always said I would increase corporation tax, and they ruled that out from the corporation tax. And I remember I was on the programme before, you had someone from the Small Business Federation, he said, when we dealt with John, actually, he exempted us. He protected us as small businesses on the corporation tax increases. So I think by boxing themselves in on income tax, on corporation tax, it meant basically they then were struggling to find where the income would come to they're right, to stabilise the economy as much as we possibly could. And I think the national insurance increase must have had an impact on growth. Of course it has.
Do you have sympathy there with Rachel Reeves, where she says, well, like with the early interview with Conway, look, low growth or stagnant growth has been a problem for a long time, right? It's not as simple as just pulling a couple of levers. Is there something more fundamental about our economy?
Yeah, I do have some sympathy with that. I think since the financial crisis in 2008, no real massive growth has occurred in Europe. It's not just the UK, it's across the piece. And we do need to change up and try and understand what are the structural causes for why our economy won't grow. And the consequence of that has always been, which is why we're seeing political consequences, is stagnated wages as well, which has been massive in terms of keeping people off the housing ladder, for example. So I have some sympathy. Where I am critical is that there's been 5 years in opposition where there could have been a bigger strategic discussion about what they wanted to do with the economy. It's not just about the debate around taxes. It is actually about what was the future going to look like.
Now, I should say that I misrepresented you. I said that you've been, early on the programme, I said you've been suspended from the Labour Party. That's not true. You've had the whip suspended.
That's right.
What's going on there, though? Are they going to give it back to you?
Well, it was a 6-month sentence. I've served my sentence. I'm just waiting to hear what now happens, basically.
I mean, have you not heard anything from them?
No. We'll see. We'll see. I look forward to that discussion with the Chief Whip.
Yeah. You better behave yourself this evening then, because if I withdraw it again.
Well, that's never been a problem, hasn't it? Just getting back to the interview, though, I think the issue is trying to get the narrative right now. Definitely is. And then backing that up with the development of a strategy which really meets the needs and delivers in the short term, basically. And part of the problems that we've got is about low pay, but that's as a result of 14 years of austerity as well. So it does mean you have to start tackling inequality, and you do have to start redistributing wealth in this country to enable that to happen. And I just give one small example of an infrastructure project that they could get on with quickly that would help people greatly, and that's Labour committed itself to the insulation of people's homes. They've cut that back a bit, unfortunately. They went ahead with that. It would create jobs, readily available jobs as well. At the same time, it would reduce people's energy bills, and it would put money in people's pockets.
Look, I agree with that policy, but I just want to come back to this point on austerity, because the Chancellor is looking at a potential re-rating downwards on growth in March when she comes to her fiscal statement.
Yeah.
And so she's either going to have to increase taxes or she's going to have to go back to the pot. So the austerity is going to be
She'll have to
worse.
tackle inequality, and that means increasing taxes on the wealthy. And then if you put it in the pockets of the poorer paid, they'll spend it.
It's genuinely interesting to hear you two debate. It's very respectful, but you just come at it from different perspectives. So it's very interesting. Thank you both very much indeed. Coming up on the Politics Hub, Peter Mandelson has overcome the odds and, despite previously describing Donald Trump as a danger to the world, he secured the keys to recently refurbished British ambassador's residence in Washington. Stay with us. Hello, welcome back. So what do Rachel Reeves' plans announced today mean for the levelling up agenda, which of course talked up prioritising left behind areas across the North and the Midlands? I've been speaking to the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Kevin Hollinrake. Thank you very much for being on the programme. Great to have you with us. So what's your reaction to Rachel Reeves' growth speech?
Well, I welcome investment. I welcome economic growth. You know, it's what we all should seek to achieve. Somewhat frustrating that, and surprising that Rachel Reeves has suddenly seen this growth agenda as one that she wants to pursue, particularly having this now optimistic view of the world after spending the first 6 months of her tenure depressing us all, the gloom and doom about where we were, which is not good for business confidence and therefore not good for economic growth. Then slapping businesses with £25 billion a year in taxes, which is not good for growth and not good for workers, actually, or consumers, because it pushes prices up and pushes wage growth down. And And so, and then what's coming down the track is lots more red tape for businesses, which again will disincentivise taking more people on, which is bad for growth. So it strikes me as a panic measure, a series of panic measures, suddenly grabbing potential investment opportunities, infrastructure opportunities off the shelf that have been hanging around, and you can easily argue that that's the right thing to do right now. But suddenly this conversion to a different approach in terms of perspective and approach is quite surprising.
Look, we know your views on the budget. You've been talking about that for a while now. But to just be kind of clear, on the measures announced today, you welcome them. You think they're a good idea? Heathrow Airport, for example. Third one where you back it.
As I say, I'm not going to be specific about each individual measure. I'm not against Heathrow. I voted for it.
Yeah.
Unlike the Prime Minister, I voted for it. And indeed, unlike the Chancellor, at the airport in Leeds Bradford Airport, which she opposed. So I'm supportive of investment. There are some challenges around Heathrow.
Are you frustrated then? Like you say, you backed Heathrow Airport. Yeah. We've heard Kevin Badenoch say she supports it as well. You must be frustrated with the last lot then. What were they doing?
Yeah, of course, we didn't get everything right, and I completely admit that. But if we want to talk about some of the things we didn't get right...
Do you think that the last Conservative government got it wrong over Heathrow then, that it should have... I mean, it's taken 20 years, hasn't it, this debate?
If you want to talk about Heathrow, listen, I don't think our party was in principle supportive of Heathrow. We voted for it, which the opposition did not. So the current government did not.
Boris Johnson said he'd lie down in front of the tractors.
That was a different thing, but our party voted it through against the opposition at the time. Heathrow, in terms of specifically, so yes, in principle, supportive, but you've got to move the M25 to deliver that runway, as I understand it. And around the M25, there's lots of reservoirs, a number of reservoirs, so it's not easy to see where you'd put it. Now, I certainly would not like to see the taxpayer pick up a tab for billions of pounds to deliver that infrastructure improvement. And there are other ways to deliver growth in the UK that I'm more interested in. For example, investment in the north. I'm a northerner, clearly, and we know that investment in the regions that have been underinvested in for decades, to me, is more important. And that's the north, the Midlands, the southwest, for example, Wales and Scotland. And Network North, which includes Northern Powerhouse Rail, which connects Hull to Leeds, to Bradford, to Manchester, to Liverpool, is a far better project for me to invest in. Now, Labour put that on ice. Why did they not come out today and say, let's invest in the north, let's get the whole country firing on all cylinders? That's what I'd like to have heard.
It's interesting talking to you because it comes across passionately that that's what you would like to see, right? And I think a lot of people watching would agree with you. Do you think it was a bit of a betrayal of people when, you promised to level up and that didn't happen?
I'll tell you what I think we got wrong. I think it was a great ambition, a grand ambition, and levelling up. And they've dropped that from the title. I've kept it in my title as Shadow Secretary of State. But I think what we didn't say to people is because those areas of the country have been underinvested in for decades, it would take decades to rectify that. And I think we should have said to people, because the difference...
Well, you didn't really set out much of a roadmap either, though, did you? People understand things take a long time.
Well, can I tell you what we did do? If you want to talk about what we did in Parliament, we spent £600 billion, record levels, on infrastructure in the last Parliament, and we changed the methodology, the Green Book, as they call it, in where that money is spent, which meant more money is spent in the regions. That's what we did. What we should have said to people, the gap, in terms of the relative economic gap per capita between the North East and London and the South East, is as wide as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification. That took 30 years and $2 trillion to narrow that gap. That's what we should have said. This is going to take a long time. I would welcome Labour saying that they understand that and they're going to invest for decades if they're in power, or we should match their commitment to say if we take over, we'll continue with that, because that would really improve the fortunes of people right across the country.
Just talking to you today, if I'm honest, it's quite easy to interview Conservative politicians at the minute, right? Because you say, why isn't Labour doing that? And the response is, well, why didn't you do that? Or look at your record on that, or you really messed up this as well. Do you think that's a bit of an issue when you've got a new disrupting force on the right, on your turf, in reform, who don't have a record on which they have to defend?
Well, as you know, Sophie, I came on your programme, we were in government and defended our record in government. So in opposition, it's different. But it's different for us right now, there's no doubt about it. We're here to oppose the government, but also we've got opposition on our flank. Now, many people are concerned about it, including me, and I want people to vote Conservative because what's going to happen if they don't? We'll split the vote on the right, and Labour will get in again. That's exactly what happened this time. But we can't just take that on trust, and that's not the only message we've got to deliver. We've also got to say to people, we have the solutions to all those concerns that people have. Some of the things we have had success on while we're in office, some we've made mistakes on. Things like immigration, for example. And there was never some kind of conspiracy to keep immigration high. We just got it wrong. But what Kemi's said she will do, and I support this, is figure out exactly how we control migration in the future, both legal and illegal migration. We want to do that. I live in this country too. This is so important to me, my children, my grandchildren. We all want to get this right. And I believe we can. I believe we have the solutions to those problems and the economic problems and the levelling up and all those things and housing delivery, all those things that really matter, and not just delivering 1.5 million homes, but individual people being able to buy a house, first-time buyers getting on the ladder, all those things that we believe in that I don't think any other party, a major party in this country, really does believe in. And I can show you what Labour are doing on that in terms of withdrawing support for first-time buyers, where we want those first-time buyers on the ladder. So, yes, I do think we've got solutions. Have we got challenges right now? Yes, of course we have.
OK, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sophie.
Still to come on the Politics Hub. Comeback king Peter Mandelson is all set to be confirmed as UK ambassador to Washington. We're taking a look at a true political operator. That's next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, the third runway at Heathrow is cleared for takeoff. The Chancellor says the plan is crucial for growth. We'll speak to those for and against the expansion and hear from those who could be forced from their homes. All that and much more on the UK Tonight from 8 o'clock.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, okay?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free, wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog.
The force is incredible.
It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Sunday, exclusively on Peacock, with the top of the Premier League still unsettled.
This duo have been in a league of their own.
Two clubs desperately scramble to climb the table.
The blockbuster fixture.
Arsenal.
Just what Arsenal needed.
Manchester City.
Chance for Haaland. Goal for Haaland.
This is the Premier League. Sunday, 11:30 Eastern, only on Peacock.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. To the US now, because Peter Mandelson is set to be confirmed as the UK's ambassador to Washington. Now, he's had to do some fairly whiplash-inducing backtracking on past comments he's made about Donald Trump, including calling him a reckless bully and a danger to the world. But with the incentive of the keys to the newly refurbished official residence dangling, Lord Mandelson earlier made a characteristically graceful climb down.
I consider my remarks about President Trump as ill-judged and wrong. And I think that times and attitudes towards the president have changed since then.
Well, of course, Lord Mandelson did not get to where he is today by failing to play the game, and he's not known in Labour circles as the Prince of Darkness for nothing.
The Prime Minister has asked me to come back.
What a tune. Let's talk to John Salma. I mean, you've got to give credit to the guy, right? He is a political survivor.
I would absolutely give credit to him, and also to so sort of elegantly eat his own words. Although I would say it's not very different to where a lot of the cabinet are in terms of what they've said about President Trump in the past. So, you know, in that sense, he is aligned to the government's view, private, personal view.
That looked like a hostage video.
Well, with the history with the flags and I was wrong. Yeah, it's true.
I've known Peter 45 years, I think it is, because we worked together years ago as kids at the TUC. And I tell you this, he always gets into scrapes. Always. It's inevitable. He can't help himself, what he says or what he does. You know, he had to resign twice in government.
But now he's going to be the ambassador to Washington. You must respect that hustle. He has American-style, President Trump-style hustle.
No, he always bounces back, but then usually the next scrape is even worse than the last one, so that's what worries me.
Oh, so we've got to look at what do you think it's going to be, a diplomatic incident?
Nothing would surprise me.
Donald Trump and Peter Mandelson, can you imagine? Great chat. Love the irony of the hustle, getting into scrapes. It's been a pleasure to have you both on the programme this evening. Well, that is it from us tonight. I will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, who's going to have more on that Heathrow Airport expansion. And, of course, at 9 p.m, we've got The World with Yalda Hakim coming up too. I'll see you tomorrow, though. See you then.